Our first speaker was an activist in housing when he was just in his early 20s. He won election to the Newark City Council at the age of 25 years old. And since then, he's been an advocate for working families in New Jersey and now in the U.S. Senate. Just last month, he stood with laid-off workers in a parking lot of a Toys R Us store in New Jersey to call for severance pay for the more than 30,000 people suddenly left without a job when the company went bankrupt due to private equity greed in April. He's also a leading voice in the fights to reform our criminal justice system and end mass incarceration. He's fought for sentencing and bail reform and to make it easier for formerly incarcerated people to find work. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Senator Cory Booker.
Hello, everybody! Hello! Come on, sit down, sit down! They got me on a tight clock here. So I'm looking forward to getting to your questions and answers, but I want to just share with you my heart that this room takes me back to my community. Not everybody here is from Newark, New Jersey, but I will tell you this, that's my community. And this idea that we have, this intersectionality, that we are all in this together, is more real today in America than ever. Now, I want to share with you the words of one of my greatest mentors. Back in the 1990s, I didn't just move to Newark, but I decided to move to one of the tougher neighborhoods in our city. It was the south end of Martin Luther King Boulevard. The median income in that neighborhood, the last census was about $14,000 per household. It's where I still live today. I am proud to be one of the only, in fact, the only senator that lives in a low-income, working-class, inner-city community. I get up every day and my neighbors remind me every single day, check me and challenge me to continue to focus on the unfinished business of America. Now, when I first moved into that neighborhood, there's an old saying that when you come to the end of all the light you know and you step into the unknown, that faith is known. One of two things will happen. Either you'll find solid ground underneath you when you step, or the universe will send you people who will teach you how to fly. And one of my greatest mentors, I always say I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD from the streets of Newark. One of my greatest mentors is a guy named Frank Hutchins. Frank Hutchins led the longest rent strike in Newark history. Back in the 1970s, beat the housing authority, got the residents back rent. And at that point, he worked with me. I was a young lawyer taking on slumlords in Newark. Now, Frank taught me about spirit. I still remember these long tenant meetings. We sat through hundreds of them. Sometimes I would get antsy and complain to him afterwards about a 4-hour tenant meeting, and he would remind me, he said, Cory, you need to see every person. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to be validated. And more than that, this is not just about fixing buildings, it is about repairing community. It's about creating the beloved community. When Frank got older, his eyesight started going. He pushed me to run for office. My first office was really because of him and some tenant organizers that helped get me elected to the Central Ward. By the time I became mayor of the city, his eyesight had completely gone. But every time I would see him, I'd go to his house to take him out grocery shopping. I'd be, hey Frank, it's Cory. And even though he was blind, he'd be like, I see you. And I'm like, Frank. We would take him around, he'd be like, take me to the movies. I was like, Frank, you can't see. He'd be like, I just want to sit there, Cory. I want to feel the movie. He eventually got old and sicker and was in hospice. And I remember going to visit him in hospice, and I was so upset that there were not thousands of people there. There were only a few visitors. It was my ego that was caught up, not his. You see, Frank knew that life was about significance, not celebrity. Life was about purpose, not popularity. Life is not about how many people show up when you're dead, but how many people you serve while you were alive. And so Frank kept getting sicker and sicker, and I would take time away from the mayor's office just to sit with him. On the last day going in, when the incredible healthcare professionals, some of those workers who don't get the dignity and the due that they get, they stopped me and said, this might be it. And I knew this would be the last time I would see him, so I walk in and I announce myself and I say, Frank, it's Cory. And now he can barely speak, but he forces out the words, I see you. I sat with him, I kissed his forehead, I held him, I told him what was going on in the city. I I told him how much I loved him, and that was the last thing I said to him. I said, Frank, I love you. And then he forces out the only other thing he said to me. I see him struggling to do it, but he seemed to be determined to let me know. He said, I love you. Now that would be the last time I saw Frank Hutchins alive. One of Newark's great tenant leaders, a man that lived the words of Alice Walker, who said the real revolutionaries are always concerned with the least glamorous stuff. The raising a child's reading level, the filling out food stamp forms because folk got to eat, revolution or not. The real revolutionary is always close enough to the people to be there for them when they're needed. I will tell you, what I want to share with you is Frank's last words. I see you, I love you. I see you, I love you. We're at a point in American history where we have stopped seeing each other. We don't see the immigrants down at the border having their very virtues that we hold common and dear violated with a vicious racism. We don't see the children in prison today. Right now, while we sit here, there are children in prison who have not even been convicted of anything yet, but just because they come from families who can't afford to get them out. Don't see the people who are struggling with lifetime sentences because they have felony convictions for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents did. And now they can't vote. Now they can't get food stamps. Now they can't get public housing. Now they can't get a job. We don't see each other. Occasionally we see the awful tragedy of mass shootings, but do you see the people shot in my community? Shahad Smith shot on my block just months ago. We're not seeing each other. You see the millions of American seniors who live in poverty because their meager Social Security checks don't go far enough. Can we see each other? Not just the people who will stand here on this stage, but the people who work in this hotel, cleaning bathrooms, cleaning toilets, cleaning floors. Do we see each other, America? Do we see that the very idea of America is being eroded in this country? If you were going to be born poor on the planet Earth generations ago, this would be the nation to be born in. But now other countries are surpassing us and lifting people out of poverty while our poverty rates are stuck. One of the only industrialized nations that has 20% of their children living in poverty. And you've got friends and folk who live in my neighborhood who work full-time jobs, catch extra shifts where possible, but still don't make enough money to make ends meet. Do we see each other? We have a common pain in this country, but we seem to have lost our sense of common purpose. Folk are trying to divide us and cut us up, pit us against each other. Poor white folks against poor black folks, poor brown folks against poor black folks. We need to understand this is one nation, indivisible with one destiny. And that brings me to the last thing that Frank said. He said, I love you. I'm telling you right now, if this country hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. Right. If you're not deeply disturbed by what's coming, you gotta check your own love. Some people call it patriotism. That's a fine word, but understand patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. And what is love? Love is sacrifice. Love is struggle. Love is storming beaches in Normandy for your country. Love is going on freedom rides knowing you're going to get beaten and bombed. Love is marching for voting rights, knowing that you're going to get hit and beat down by Alabama state troopers. Now is the time that we call for some love. Knowing that we have one destiny. Love, knowing that you can't separate my pain from your pain. Love is knowing what James Baldwin wrote to Angela Walker when she was in prison. If they come for you in the morning, then they're going to come for me at night. Let me tell you right now, love is struggle. Love is struggle. And we know what a great leader, Frederick Douglass, says, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. And so let me tell you to all the faithful here, I'm a big believer, before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me in how you treat other people. Don't talk right and walk wrong on me. But there is this idea in our nation of a civic gospel. We swear oaths to this flag and say we'll be a nation of liberty and justice for all, and then we turn our back on our neighbor who is struggling, on our fellow American that's hurting. If you love this country, that means you work every day to make those values real and right. And so I end with this. We cannot just swear our oath with our hands over our heart. This is time to use our hands outstretched, getting to work. And there's a man that called us to swear an oath, and I'm going to end with his words. A man who wrote in the year my daddy was born. A poor man in the mountains of North Carolina, too poor to be poor, he was just Poe. Couldn't afford the other two letters. Well, in that year, the great poet Langston Hughes challenged Americans to live up to their oath. And he said, oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, but yet must be, the land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. And who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Let us swear that oath now, that we will be lovers of this country, that we will struggle for this country, that we won't let folk divide this country, that we will be one nation under God, that we will be indivisible, and that we will make America a place with liberty and justice for all. I love you. I see you. I love you. I see you.
Thank you so much, Senator Booker. Okay, if you hear something you like, you have a sign, you have a placard in your seat, feel free to lift it up and wave it high in the sky. And now we're gonna get to why we're here. We're gonna hear stories and questions from people that are making this vision of America come to reality, that are fighting for it. Our first question is about Wall Street reform and comes from Cheryl Claude, who is a member of Rise Up Retail. Cheryl, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Claude. I am assistant manager at Toys R Us in Woodbridge, New Jersey. I've been with the company for 33 years, and I am over 30,000 workers who are losing our jobs at Toys R Us at the end of June. Part of our wave of store closings, our job loss of our private equity deals in the past year. Private equity and hedge fund managers like KKR and Bain Capital lost advantage of us to get richer without regard of families and communities. They are continues a vicious cycle in which get richer at expense of working people. Banks, fund managers are cutting jobs, pay, benefits, driving up costs, housing, college, and prescription drugs, and dodging their fair share of taxes. We need leaders that will take Wall Street and fight against their efforts and rig the system. We appreciate you sharing with us. If KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado won't agree, severance pay will commit to introducing legislative pay and severance pay payments for laid-off workers, fund by fairness fees, and withdraw profit tax to provide equity deals. As U.S. Senators, will you commit to be introducing legislation to stop most dangerous high-debt and high-risk legislative buyouts? Will you commit to end legal and regulated loopholes to hedge funds and force them to pay rules and protect workers, communities, and taxpayers?
So I've got 2 or 3 minutes to answer. I just want to first of all say, Cheryl and I have stood together already. I want to thank you for speaking out. You've been representing the 30,000 workers in such a strong way. It was an honor to be with you in front of the Toys R Us in our community where this company is based. I also want to thank you for just being a truth teller. There are folks like you, and I met others who have worked for that company loyally, giving up your holidays, your vacations. Everybody knows you work for a toy company, you gotta work during the Christmas season. And then after decades of commitment and service to a company, there are thousands and thousands of workers now that are being left with absolutely nothing. And the practices you push to, that Bain, Vornado, KKR, are so toxic to our nation. And they're changing practices of what I call a really perverse capitalism. And this is what they did to, for those of you who don't know, to Toys R Us, is they loaded the company up with debt. They bought the company, then loaded it up with debt that was made it impossible for them to recover, all the while extracting hundreds of millions of dollars in fees. So they were making their profits, making their wealth. And when the company failed, even some of their leaders said it failed because it was saddled with all that debt. The people were walking away with their profits and with their payments, and the workers got nothing. And so to your short answer is, I support a lot of legislation and ideas to end these kind of toxic practices, to put workers back on the center of companies' focus, not just because it's right for workers, but when you treat workers right, when you put workers on the board of trustees, when you guarantee a severance during high-risk capital investments like this, when you do things to protect workers, you do things to protect America, and actually the company, being worker-focused, does better. You also mentioned, at the end of your question, and I hope people heard it, you also mentioned what's going on with hedge funds in America. Perhaps one of the most offensive things that's been talked about is a lot of the loopholes that hedge funds take advantage of. One of the ones there is one called carried interest, where you have hedge fund leaders who are making enormous profits and pay less in taxes than even the people that work in their office, even their assistants and the like. That one tax, ending that loophole alone, could create a $15 billion revenue stream for the federal government. What could we do with that? Affordable college, infrastructure, expanding healthcare. So we have got to do a raft of reforms, including some things that, to me, that you hear about every day, but you don't understand how toxic they are. Things like stock buybacks, which were just back in the 1980s, something considered stock manipulation and were illegal. Glass-Steagall, all these things we did to give corporations greater and greater freedom allowed them to maximize more and more profits and at the expense of workers. Where are we right now in America? We're at an 85-year corporate profit high in corporate profits and a 65-year low in terms of percentage of all of our GDP of workers' pay. And so this has got to end, and I believe the way to do it is putting common sense regulations in place, and I'm going to support those and continue to fight for them.
Thank you. The next question is about healthcare and comes from Robert Suarez, who is a member of Vocal New York. Thank you, Robert, for being here.
Good morning.
Robert, how are you?
My name is Robert Suarez, and I'm a Vocal New York leader, and I'm here today representing People's Action.
And Robert, where are you from?
I'm from New York.
All right. All right. I hope you like the Giants who play in New Jersey.
I lost my mother to AIDS. She died in my arms in the year 2000 due to inadequate healthcare system. This and other struggles have led me to become homeless. I've lived under bridges and under highways while struggling with drug use. I was offered jails instead of care. Let me be clear. It was not drugs or HIV that killed my mother. It was a government that refused to support proven healthcare interventions like syringe exchanges and quality care. It was not drugs that put me behind bars or left me homeless. It was a system that promotes incarceration over care. My story is a painful one, shared by many people across this country. And while racism and stigma is what drove many of these tragedies in my life, I will stand with any person who is denied the human right to quality health care. Whether you are white, black, brown, gay, straight, or transgender, our liberation is bound together. Overdose has plagued my community for decades because politicians have long ignored public health approaches that could have saved tens of thousands of lives. Now, rural and small-town America has also become victims of this crisis, and the same public health solutions are being overlooked. We must bind our struggles together and win the basic human rights to health care and end this failed drug war policies. Since 2017, People's Action groups across the country led over 800 actions and events to defend our health care. This year, we're calling for improved Medicare for all and building out work to address overdose crisis. Our question for you, Senator Booker. 1, how can we achieve universal health care that is accessible and affordable for all? 2, do you support comprehensive legislation like the CARE Act that will provide millions of dollars to address the overdose crisis? Do you support replacing a failed drug war policy with policies grounded in public health and compassion over incarceration?
So first of all, thank you for your question, and God bless the memory of your mother. I believe this when my father died, that death can end a life, but it can't end a love. And I know that she drives you today to fight for justice so that other mothers don't have to meet the same fate, not having access to health care. So let me put this very simply and plainly. Health care is a right. Health care is a right. Health care is a right. And you cannot have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You cannot have those things without access to public education. It should be a universal right in America. We all agree on that. That was a radical thought at one point. You can't have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without retirement security. That was considered something that was unimaginable, that we would have a system like Social Security, which needs obviously work and improvement. Equal justice under the law. I can go through all the things that are common sense that we have had to fight for. Health care is a right in America. You cannot access the American dream without having health care. This is why I, amongst other senators, support not only having health care as a right and universal health care, but the pathways there are things that are, to me, very common sense, like expanding Medicaid access, expanding Medicare access, and beginning to make sure that everyone is covered. And I know this for my community, that if people are denied health care, people die. And when you move people's decisions back to making decisions to use a hospital emergency room as their primary care physician, in many ways, problems have progressed to a point where they've become so severe that it's too late to save a person's life. I want to use this limited time, I want to use a part of your question to pivot for a second. Because there's too much of a stigma in this country in not understanding that mental health and physical health, it's the same thing. The stigma what we do on mental health issues is outrageous. This is why I'll never forget sitting in Top's Diner right across the borderline of Newark and East Newark, sitting in this diner talking with one of my constituents who had to put aside his health care medication because he couldn't afford the prescription drug. We now have a point in our country where prescription drug prices have risen so dramatically, putting so many people who are putting their life-saving medication or healthcare or mental health medication aside so that they can afford rent. This man's story was tragic to me because since he wasn't taking his mental health medication, he eventually got fired from his job and was even in worse financial straits. But you and I both know, to get to the point I'm trying to pivot to, is that you can judge what a nation's soul is about by going into their prisons. There are some countries that imprison their press. The reporters who are here are very safe in America, even though they're demonized by our current president. We're not arresting reporters. Some countries, they arrest their political opposition. You know, you see this in Russia and other places. Even though we had a major political party in America chanting "lock her up," the reality is that's not the character of this country. But what is tragic about this country is if you go into our prisons, who do you see? You see overwhelmingly the poor. You see overwhelmingly brown people. And by the way, a whole bunch of white folks are being overly incarcerated as well. But you also see so many people who are struggling with mental illness, who need help, hospitals, who need medical care, and instead we clog them into the prisons. And then we do things to people in our prisons that other countries call torture, that triggers mental illness, like solitary confinement for juveniles, solitary confinement for pregnant women, shackling pregnant women in America. And so if we do not become a nation that has a system of comprehensive health care, we are going to continue to pay so much more on the back end of problems after they've gotten worse, or putting them people, assaulting the dignity of all of us by clogging our prisons and jails with people that need help and not hurt. And I want to finish with this one very important thing. I argue the moral argument. That's where I'm focused. And I think we are at a moral moment of our country where we're seeing a level of moral vandalism like we have never seen before. Yeah. But the economic argument and the moral argument, more and more, now that we have the data to analyze this, it comes to the same conclusion. You take a city like Seattle that did research on what's more expensive for America. Having homeless people on the streets who are struggling with healthcare issues, like mental illness, or to put them in supportive housing. I'm a former mayor. Supportive housing is expensive. Well, Seattle did the analysis on 23 people, what their costs were on the street, and what their costs were when they put them in supportive housing. They saved taxpayers in that city $1 million because of the cost of leaving people on the streets. We have become this society that is paying billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, more people in prison in the South than on college campuses, building a new prison in this country every 10 days between the time I was in law school and the time I was the mayor of my city, spending enormous amounts of money, causing more problems than we're solving on the back end, than making the moral investments in healthcare, in education, the moral investments in fellow Americans.
Thank you.